The 10 racial stereotypes most commonly used against black people. Don't have the slightest doubt. Each one of these stereotypes will be analyzed in this work in an individual way, so you can understand how much they influence the behavior, negative image, and low personal value of some Afro-descendants, but also in the deformed ideas that are held about black people as products of these stereotypes. If at the end of this video, you consider that there were some stereotypes associated with black people, which you know, or they are used in the nation where you live, let me know in the comment box, and I will be happy to include it in a following listing. On that side, I won't take up any more of your time. When you watch documentaries about the lifestyle of many African tribes, the following stereotype comes to mind. Number 1. Black people are savages. One of the first negative stereotypes most commonly used against blacks during the slave system in the American colonies as a mechanism of oppression, mistreatment and justification of their condition as slaves. The narrative that black people were considered savages by slave owners was a way to rationalize the poor treatment of black Africans who arrived as slaves during the transatlantic slave market from Africa to the land of the New World. But it also justified the belief that black people could be considered merchandise or objects of labor, which was used for hard work in agricultural tasks, large promotions, the cane industry, and working in the mines. Product of cultural differences and the supposed superiority of European culture over African culture, as another element to analyze that also gave rise to this type of stereotypes associated with black Africans. From my point of view, these negative narratives associated with African slaves in America by slave owners were other reasons for the origin of this stereotype, which creates the distorted idea that black African slaves acted like wild animals. Don't worry. When you look at poverty levels, educational levels and social behavior, and when you think about how black people live in all post-slavery nations, it could be the genesis of the number 2. Black people are not intelligent. As a result of this negative narrative created by the slave-owning colonizers that black people were savages, the stereotype also arose that black people were not intelligent, saying that black slaves had the behavior or intelligence of a 6-year-old child or that they were less than humans. Reasons why they were considered animals, which had to be domesticated with the whip, chains and punishment. For some reason, when black people show certain elements of African culture in the nation where they live at the moment, many individuals, as a way of denigrating black culture, use the following stereotype. Number 3. Black people are vulgar. As meaning or suggesting, tasteless, trashy, or indecent. When you talk about the genesis of blacks being vulgar, which is another negative stereotype, there is no doubt that cultural differences were the reason for this stereotype. If you observe the lifestyle, the customs, the different tribal groups, the different types of dances, clothing, and oral traditions, but above all the religious customs, if you have a European mentality, you come to the conclusion that everyone shows a certain behavior considered from the Western point of view as vulgar. Another thing to consider when analyzing the behavior resulting from the different African cultures in comparison to the different European cultures, Spain, France, Portugal, England, and even more so when we talk about a medieval Spain that was barely in the pre-capitalist stage of economic development in which the population was controlled by the influence of the Catholic Church, and the decisions of the Pope in some cases were above the crown. The differences were notable in the way of living, dressing, religious ideas, customs and differences in lifestyle between white European colonizers and black African slaves. Let's continue talking about one of the most commonly used phrases around the world when looking at the lifestyle of black people, which will be number 4. Black people are dirty. It is one of the stereotypes are most often used against black people in societies where classism and social differences are important. Many times cultural, economic, but also social and lifestyle differences tend to produce the false idea that black people are dirty, especially when these black people do not meet social expectations regarding behavior and personal appearance in certain societies. In most post-slavery nations in Latin America and the Caribbean, no one doubts that blacks occupy the lowest social position, socially speaking, and the stereotypes of blacks are a partner, although it has a pejorative connotation associated with black culture due to the low educational level, social condition, which, based on the high levels of poverty and the way they live and dress, tends to create the idea that the poor are dirty, a stereotype that is the product of classism. Let's now talk about one of those used in the United States. Number 5. Black people are lazy, or some blacks don't like it or don't want to work. They like easy things. To understand these stereotypes associated with blacks, we have to know the history of slavery in the United States after the Civil War and the process of emancipation of slaves, in which millions of blacks were left without work when slavery ended. There were many black ex-slaves who did not have jobs during the Reconstruction after the Civil War and who refused to work because of the low wages of the former slave owners, which created the social idea that black people were lazy. But at this time in the United States, blacks have less opportunity to find work that allows for a salary adequate to their needs based on the American cost of living, and there are many blacks who want to work for salaries considered low. There are many jobs that blacks do not want to do due to low salaries, jobs that are often done by migrant workers, which creates the impression that blacks do not want to work and are therefore considered lazy. Let's talk about the one most used by American politicians, which is number 6. Black people live on public assistance or government plans. We must see these types of stereotypes associated with African Americans within the context of economic inequality, but also social exclusion in the United States, where blacks or African Americans, as a result of low wages, the high number of blacks who do not have the necessary education, the history of incarceration of many black men, but above all, the high levels of crime in poor neighborhoods, and above all, the disintegration of the family. This means that many families without a father or head of the family tend to need public assistance to financially support their children. Let's talk a little about what the political class and the justice system, like the police, use against black people, which would be number 7. Black people are criminals. When you analyze the stereotype that blacks are criminals, we must know the high incarceration of blacks in the United States and the inequality in the treatment of the American criminal system, which tends to produce sentences 3 times higher for African Americans compared to whites in a similar crime. Another aspect to consider is that social and economic problems, social exclusion, racism against blacks, police abuses against blacks, high levels of crime in black neighborhoods, high consumption and sales of prohibited substances create the impression that black people are criminals. When you also look at the newspaper headlines, the big national news networks on television, and if you add to that the negative images presented in all the violent movies, which always present African Americans as criminals, that creates the idea among American people that black people are criminals. Let's talk about one that is widely used in many Latin American nations as a result of the religious syncretism of blacks, which is number 8. Blacks worship demons. As a result of cultural differences, mainly when you talk about religious beliefs and different African traditions, create this narrative, which creates the idea that black people worship demons or practice witchcraft, especially when we know the impact that the Yoruba religion has voodoo, but also the religious syncretism of the descendants of Africans in Latin America and the Caribbean. No one doubts that when the colonizers observed the different religious manifestations of the slaves in comparison with the religious system of the colonizers, who were mostly Catholic and Christian, as a mechanism of Christianization, the arguments were used that the blacks had religious practices that worshiped different demons, which they were against Christian practices in the colonies of the New World. This is one of the most used in Latin America, but also in the United States, which is as a result of the sexual exploitation of the black woman's body and the fetish associated with the sexuality of black people. We have to talk about the most controversial stereotype, which would be number 9. Black people are hypersexual, they are hot, or they have a big penis. One of the most popular stereotypes associated with blacks in all post-slavery nations is the hypersexual behavior, especially when we talk about black men, in which the size of the penis is considered a symbol of the intensity of the sexual behavior of blacks. This type of stereotype associated with black women has its origins in the slave system, in which black women were seen as an object of pleasure for the slave owners, but also for the colonizing barons during the colonial system as a result of the limited availability of white women during the conquest of the lands of the New World. Black women were seen as women full of sexual energy who were considered hot in bed, often creating narratives associated with the sexuality of black women as a result of the morbid nature of the conquerors, but also of the different stereotypes associated with black sexuality. From my point of view, the most used at this time would be number 10. Black people are better athletes than white people. As a result of racial discrimination, Black people were prohibited from participating in any type of sporting activity when we talk about the United States. But with the new opportunity for sports inclusion, we can all accept that black people are good athletes by nature. When you analyze the great sports figures of recent times in the different sporting disciplines, you believe in the collective imagination that blacks are better athletes than whites, but it is a conclusion that remains to be seen. When you observe the great success and recognition of blacks in the world of sports, no one can doubt that blacks are good athletes. When we talk about playing baseball, basketball, football, soccer, boxing, and marathons, to name a few sports disciplines. No one doubts when you talk about a world-class figure like the NBA basketball player Michael Jordan and LeBron James, or one of the best boxers of all time like the African-American Muhammad Ali. And let's not talk about one of the best women's tennis players in the world like Serena Williams. We must also mention the organized baseball game in the United States, as Jackie Robinson, Hank Aaron, and Willie Mays. But, also, let's talk about one of the greatest Brazilian soccer players, Pelé. To finish, we must also mention Jamaican track stars considered the fastest runners on Earth. That is why we must put the fastest man on the planet, Usain Bolt, in this category. That creates the idea that blacks are better athletes than whites, which is a conclusion born from this type of racial stereotype due to the success that blacks have in sports. Ladies and gentlemen, if you like this type of content, I will ask you for something that costs you nothing. Please leave your comments and like it as a way to help this channel. But also subscribe to this channel, and if it is not too much, please share this video. Those who work on this channel will appreciate this great help.